Medications for opioid use disorders in correctional settings. Shifting the paradigm, creating a balanced correctional and rehabilitative approach. The Opioid Response Network is funded by SAMHSA to provide resources and technical assistance needed locally to address the opioid crisis. This video is part of a series to provide guidance on the implementation of medications for opioid use disorder in correctional facilities. Leading corrections and behavioral health experts present information on topics such as the use of medication, models of delivery, diversion, and linkages to care and community support. Rachel Bray, Daryl McGraw, and Brandon George respond to questions about lived experience and changed outlook.
During your involvement in the justice system, what type of treatment was available and what was your personal experience with it?
The short answer of what was available is not much. And so I've been involved in the justice system since I was a teenager, a young teenager. I've been touched by the justice system several times before the age of 18, multiple times afterwards. And while there may have been a brief assessment done or something throughout that process at probation or community corrections, by the time I was 16 years old, I had, what's that meme with the dumpster on fire? Like, that was my life. I had multiple friends that were murdered over drug use. I had suffered trauma and abuse. I was using on a daily basis. And my treatment would consist of, hey, you need to show up on Tuesday nights for 1 hour to sit in a group session. And it was so woefully inadequate looking back on it that there's no wonder that not a lot of progress was made. And specifically around this, as I got older and got into opiates and became an intravenous heroin user, withdrawal and staving off withdrawal was my #1 priority on a daily basis. And so in 2008, I was on an interstate in Indianapolis. I had 3 police pulling behind me. I knew immediately they had caught on to what I was doing. I know I was going to jail that day, and I didn't pull over. And I didn't pull over primarily because I knew what was going to come in the coming hours. After getting arrested, I was going to go into withdrawal, which was going to be the almost excruciating experience that I've been through. And certainly it's not a justified reason for not pulling over for the police, but my job here is to give you my experience. And so I can tell you that when I was in that car and when I was not pulling over, literally the thought that was going through my head was, I don't want to go to jail, I don't want to go through withdrawal, I don't want to go to jail, I don't want to go through withdrawal. And so eventually I did pull over, thank God nobody was hurt that day. But, just to my point, it took 6 days to get aspirin. 6 days to get aspirin, and that was with their protocol in place. And so I really applaud everybody that's in the room today. This is a really difficult topic. Public safety and public health have 2 very different views of the world, and it's going to take some give on both sides, and hopefully we can change from the experience that I had in the justice system when it involves treatment.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, are we here? Make me feel like I'm alone in here. I was getting nervous because I see a lot of people out there and I don't hear anything. I'm getting nervous. Similar to what Brandon said, there wasn't a lot of services offered when I was incarcerated. I spent 10 years of my life in and out of the correctional system on the installment plan. So I would go in for a few years, come in, go back, make sure the food was still gross, keep checking in and out. And the last time I was incarcerated was May 7, 2007. And it was just typical cycle, just in and out. And I did all the programs, typical in the DOC. In Connecticut, we have programs tier 2. I was going to the NA, tier 1s, just to get those certificates, just going through the motions. And when I'm excited about this topic that we're actually talking about treatment in the facilities, because I'm an old school, right? So I'm considered an OG, and in prison, old is 35. So there you go. I'm not 35, by the way. But I remember the detox that we used to use was when someone came in dope sick, we would all pool together as inmates, get candy and the sweets, wrap them in blankets, let them throw up, use the bathroom in the shower, clean it up, make sure the CO would be like, you guys take care of them. And then a couple after, we would bring back food and stuff, and that was our system. That's the way we took care of people. And, a lot of this conversation today is about people and treating people as human beings, right? When they come through the door, they're sons, mothers, dads. They're not, I know that we use a lot of times in the Department of Correction, the word offender is acceptable, but for me, it's human beings. We're talking about people. So that's the thing that, I think that for me, this is a three-legged stool. It's community, systems, and individuals, right? The community has its role, the system has its role, and the individual, like Lieutenant Bray said, has their role. The community, and I'll go more into that, we can talk more about that, but for me, I just think about when I went to prison, there wasn't really a lot. It was typical. It was just, and the person like myself, the identified drug addict, got treated less than. And even within our circle, for some reason there's a hierarchy. The cocaine guy is cool, right? The heroin guy is okay. The crack guy is really at the bottom of the barrel, and the person that does PCP, he just fits in there. He's like, well, at least I don't smoke crack. So I'm like, bro, you were naked on a scooter when you got arrested, but whatever. I appreciate the conversation, and the lieutenant talked about stigma, and I'm interested to open up the dialogue so we could talk more about human beings and how do we service these individuals that are struggling with a lifelong process. Addiction is prison in itself. Not only being in prison, but being addicted is like on the street and being in another prison in itself. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So the next question again is directed toward Daryl and Brandon. How has your experience as a person in the justice system impacted your professional life and the projects that you're now involved in?
Tremendously, it has. So once I got into recovery and I found this new amazing life, I immediately wanted to give back. And doing so, I thought that, being in a lot of counseling, I'm like, this is the way to do it. I want to become a counselor. So that's what I set out on doing. I went to school, got a degree in addictions counseling, and then realized I got an opportunity possibly to work in a correctional setting. And being able to bring together two worlds that I care so deeply about, those with substance use disorder and those who are incarcerated, was really kind of like a dream come true for me. But we ran into a problem with that, and as Daryl mentioned, there's a lot of stigma out there. And so when I went to go work inside of that jail, I put in a background check, just like everybody has to put in a background check. And we didn't hear back. We didn't hear back for about a month, and so the president of the company went to the sheriff, who's actually sitting here today learning about this, and said, hey, Sheriff, this is a really good guy. He's been in recovery for years now. This is a long time in the past. And the sheriff said, have you seen his record? I don't know that I can let him into my facility. And he said, at least sit down and have lunch with him, and after that, we'll either move on to the next candidate or we'll move forward. And luckily, the sheriff agreed, and what we found out during that meeting, he found out what I was doing in the recovery community, he found out about my education and addictions, found out that we were alums of the same college, said that he'd be happy to have me in his facility working with the guys in there. And that has started a process for me being able to work with those incarcerated in several instances. Me and the sheriff have been all over the state of Indiana and around discussing this topic. It takes partnerships like this to make it work. When the sheriff wanted to start talking about medication, we got in a room together. They said, what about this? Do people abuse this? What happens here? Do they get high here? And we got to have a real honest conversation about benefits, drawbacks, hurdles, things like that. While this started off for me as somebody counseling inside of a jail, it's turned into a lot of technical assistance inside correctional settings, both jails and prisons. Got to work with the Bureau of Justice to help implement peers in jails and correctional settings across the country. And I can't think of many more issues that are more important than treatment inside of facilities. So,
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Hello? You got me? All right, cool. Those are my friends up front. For me, it was a lot. It was similar, and it was interesting, and I just want to share this piece with you because it's so important to me because it was significant. May 7th, 2007 was that was the last day that I used the substance. Also, it was the last time I was in the back of a police car. So for me, I appreciate that. For me, that date, that's my birthday. That's the date that I celebrate. But I remember I was in Hartford Correctional, West Wing 25 cell, and a guy came up. He came up to me and he said, I don't remember his name. I don't know him. He said, I got a book for you to read. And I was like, man, if I was reading books, I wouldn't be in prison. And he said, no, I think you should read this book. And he slipped it under my door, and it was Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a 40-day spiritual journey, right? My court date was 41 days away. I was like, oh, God, you want me to read this book? And then I'm going to go home because I think God's a bondsman, right? So I thought he was speaking to me in West Wing. So what I did was I started reading this book, and I'm reading it and I'm writing a couple of lines here and there. But by day 26, because you have to do each day you do a chapter, by day 26 I started writing paragraphs, and I started to realize that I had a purpose in life, right? So I realized that I had purpose, and this purpose was to help people, right? I had this gift that I was going to use the worst day of my life, the worst experience of my life, as a teaching tool to help others, guide them out of this addiction and show them that there is a way of life. Along that journey, and while I was peeling this onion back, I realized that that I was a sufferer of trauma, and I didn't realize trauma had anything to do with it. And if you're implementing and you're working with people, one of the number one things that you need to be addressing, we're talking so much about medication and we're talking about these things, but we're not talking about the actual roots of addiction, trauma, the things that got me to use. People are medicating and numbing because they are suffering from something else. So yes, you could give me medication, but if I'm homeless, I'm still have problems. If I have not addressed my trauma, I still have problems. The medication is great, but I still suffer from the time that someone molested me, or I was beaten, or whatever the case may be. So if we don't address those issues, then we're really just putting a Band-Aid on it. So for me, similar to what Brandon was talking about, was peer support. My thing is peer support. And through that process of me writing and doing this work on myself, I was going through the system and someone made me a peer mentor. And that was life-changing for me. And then, of course, once I got clean, I wanted to be a drug counselor because I thought it was cool. You could wear nice clothes and you can, talk to addicts and stuff, And I wasn't thinking about being in Rhode Island on panels, but I was thinking that I work in some drug place telling people that your life could be significantly different. And so I just wanted to say that peer support is one of the main things. Recovery coaches, peers should be at your table at all facets in the planning stages. because you need to understand that, when you're creating these systems, how do you have people? You need people with lived experience talking to you about how this program is going to work, what's best going to work. A lot of times we work and we're planning things from 30,000 feet in the air, but we're not even talking to the people that can directly help you say, well, this is going to work and this is why it's going to work. And a lot of the, as inmates or people that are incarcerated, tying your hair back and all that is great, but we'll always find a way to get something into the system. But once you teach a person how to live, no longer will they even try to do that because they've found the purpose in a different way to live.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sure, I just want to make one quick announcement. I see folks are standing in the back. Please know that there are plenty of seats up front available if you'd like to sit down. Lots of seats. Sorry, go ahead.
So I do appreciate their stories. I have not lived their experiences, but the changed experience that I've had while I've been on the installment plan, touche, is that I've learned through other people's experiences the importance of what this program can do for them. As line staff, you can still be a peer mentor, okay? There is nothing wrong with educating. There is nothing wrong with guiding. You have that line. There's no need to cross the line, and you can still be effective, okay? So through their stories, through their trials and tribulations, I've had my own learning experiences from other offenders who have been through these experiences, and I have been fortunate enough to present to our new line staff in years, previous years, trauma-informed, gender responsiveness. So anybody that's here that is the line staff, you can still be supportive of these individuals, whether they're inside the facilities or outside the facilities. Thank you.
Can I just
Great,
add one
sure.
second? I appreciate that, Lieutenant, because you reminded me of something. The other thing is culture change. One of the things that people with lived experience together as a system, we start to do culture change. One of the things that we noticed when we started to put peers in the ED, that stigma started to change when they actually started to talk to people who were in recovery, who owned houses, who were doing a lot better, who started to tell their story. And within the system, everyone started to change. So thank you for that, Lieutenant.
Thank you. The next question is for everyone. What do you think is the most important support or services that you can provide people who are transitioning from prison?
They let me talk. That might be a problem. For me, I think that we go back to, I love the fact that we talk about the community support, but we also, like setting up that system. I love that the Lieutenant brought up the setting up the system from the community, from the inside, and having that, for me, is having that bridge. We talk about warm handoffs. We talk about, a lot of times, we talk about, in Connecticut, we talk a lot about in-reach, right? Meeting people early, within a year, start working with people within a year, and then when they're transitioning out, it's not so overwhelming because there's someone right now who's going home tomorrow and they're scared to death. They're scared to death. They don't know what to do. So if we start working with people early and we start connecting them with peers and systems and knowing what's out there, and the community is already ready for Joe to get out on Thursday, we already have him set up with services, it's that community linkage. It goes right back to that three-legged stool. One of the things that I happen to be blessed to be able to do is I teach forensic peer support. So I actually work with people, with peers that are already certified recovery coaches and or peer specialists, and teach them how to work with people within the criminal justice system, because that's significant. That's a different relationship. It's an added bonus to the actual training that they already have. But we start to talk about how to work with people that are transitioning out, because a lot of times when we're talking about in the correctional system, okay, so we're teaching people, we're giving them MAT, but are we preparing them to actually live, pay rent, be dads, and being actual functioning, you can be you have to learn how to be a law-abiding citizen. So we talk about a re-citizenship process, right? Teaching people what it's gonna be like when you're no longer using and going back to sometimes those same toxic environments that you came from, and how to teach people to live within those communities or families that they may be going back to, because many of you have seen where someone got really clean, they got cleaned up, if they got their weight back, and then they went right back home, and you see them 6 months later because no one actually taught them how to live in those environments.
So the focus on that continuity of care and transitioning from prison or jail back into the community, I think, is just absolutely critical. And as Daryl mentioned, it has to happen beforehand. If we go in the week before or 5 days before and say, hey, you're getting out next week, what's the plan? We've already missed it. The window is closed. And we lose people in small windows in the justice system. We lose people leaving the jail and heading to probation. We lose people leaving prison and heading to a recovery residence. And so setting up a system and some continuity there is really critical. The peer piece that Daryl's touched on is essential. You have to have it. In Indiana, we've done train the trainers at 6 or 8 of our 12 state prisons. And after that, the trainers actually are training people in the facilities that have been through treatment programs. And now I'm proud to say 2 of our prisons actually have created a job for peer supports. So if you get done with the treatment, you've been through the training for the recovery coach, you can be a recovery coach as your job inside of the facility. This also helps create a pipeline for workforce, for peer supports back in the community, and gives them training that can actually help provide them a career path when they get out. The transition, I just can't, I can't emphasize that enough. We lose people there, especially as we start talking about the medication piece. It's been touched on a little bit, but does it make sense? Okay, I want to do medication. I'm looking at all the options, doing all 3 of them, but there's not an OTP for 4 hours. Does that make sense? Should I start something where somebody's going to be 4 hours away from their medication? Or how do we overcome those barriers? What providers do we have, and how do we connect them?
So from the inside, what I can do is I can get these individuals to see and speak to the right people to help with the continuity of care and the transition when they go within the community. The biggest thing is if they're not ready, as you know, they're not ready. But regardless, that still doesn't mean that you need to neglect your duties to get them hooked up to the right people to get into the community. And once they get in the community, if they trip and fall, we'll pick them right back up and we'll start all over again. There is no disappointment. And I can't say enough that, being a lieutenant in a Department of Corrections, this probably sounds a little weird, but you can still be a role model inside the facilities. And I think that's the biggest thing. We wear a lot of hats. Our roles of correctional officers, jailers, whatever your title is, has changed over the years. Embrace it. Embrace it. We're all human beings, and at the end of the day, we're saving lives.
Great, thank you. So I think we have just a few more minutes before we're going to take audience questions. So I want to give the panelists an opportunity to share anything that they haven't had a chance to mention yet, or any important takeaways that you want to leave the folks with today.
I do want to touch upon stigmas. Stigmas is the biggest hurdle to overcome for this addiction. And once we become knowledgeable, educated on what this actually is, I think the process, the transitional process, the continuity of care, the legalities of it, I think will be a lot more simpler, and the transition will be a lot more seamless.
For this fight, this is probably one of the best times in our life to be in the position that we're in. The fact that there's billions of dollars now being dedicated to fight drug use, which has never been. I grew up in the crack era where the same behavior was criminalized and you were locked up because you were an addict. Now people say this is a medical condition and we need to address it. So here's an opportunity for all of us as professionals to take advantage of this opportunity. And one of the things that I'd be remiss to say is that when you're planning and going for these billions of dollars, write peer support in, but also think of how you're going to connect with the community. Not only the community, but the family members. Because when someone goes home from the hospital and they're given a certain type of medication, you talk to the family members and you say, this is what Joey's going to take, and this is what he's going to need, and this might happen, and this might be the adverse effect, and this is what you do. No one explains that to the family when you send somebody home on medication-assisted treatment, And no one understands that. And last but not least, when we're working with individuals, it's very challenging to have a criminal record. I've been very fortunate to have some letters behind my name and, done some really cool stuff. But at the end of the day, I still have a criminal record, and it still prevents me from getting in places. So when you add medication-assisted treatment to that, so the employer says, hey, yeah, definitely I'm going to hire you. You see, I've had some trouble. I understand your criminal background. But then he says you have to take a urine and you have to do this physical. You have to teach people how to talk about, oh, yeah, by the way, you might see this in my system. And a lot of times that's going through. So now this person doesn't get the job, even though he was already, the criminal background was fine. But if we don't teach people how to talk to employers about, not only do I have a criminal record, but you also might see something in my urinalysis because I'm on a certain type of medication. So conversation is key.
And just to double down on a couple of those points, stigma is a word we throw around. I don't know if it's stigma, I don't know if it's discrimination, but you're talking about stigma in two supercharged areas: incarceration and medication for addiction treatment. And as somebody in recovery, as somebody who used medication for my addiction, it is... I don't know how to verbalize how stigmatized it is still. And so just as an example, I talked to you guys about the relationship I had with the sheriff. Known him for years, been all over the state with him. We've filmed stuff together. I was so fearful to tell him that I was taking or had taken medication for my opioid use disorder. It took me years to do that. And the only reason I ended up doing it was so that I could put some context into how helpful it was for recovery when he was considering doing it for his facility, his correctional facility. And if that is my experience for somebody who doesn't face, I'm not going to face repercussions for it, right? I run a statewide recovery organization. It's accepted in my circles for the most part, but it's still there's so much stigma around it. Is the Attorney General going to start working with me? Is the Health Department going to start? What's going to happen as a result of this? And so the more we can put peers into places and eliminate that. He talked about it with the EDs. The same thing with police. We do peers and police and a lot of quick response teams where you embed peers into first responders. Again, when you spend 30 hours a week next to somebody that has substance use disorder and they talk about going to coach their kid at night and the house they just bought and the car and this and that, it really can help change the view. I would challenge anybody to spend that much time with somebody in recovery and not have their view change. So it's not about having somebody come up and tell a story. Anybody can do that. Trust me, we know when somebody's just inviting us so they can say, yes, we have somebody in recovery here. Are they there in the planning process? If you're putting a program into your jail, is somebody with lived experience there?
Technical assistance is available to support the evidence-based prevention, treatment, and recovery of opioid use disorder. To request technical assistance, visit opioidresponsenetwork.org.